Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the new things in Angular version 12. We're going to go down a kind of a list and just chat on a few things and have a great discussion. So looking forward to it. Let's say hi to our panelists, and we'll then say hi to our guest, and we'll get into the content. Joining us today, we've got Bonnie. Bonnie, what's going on?
Hey, happy Friday. Good to see you all.
Yeah, good to have you. Alyssa's with us. Alyssa, how's it going?
Hey, good to be here. Today's the first day in 9 days that I'm not coughing. Just straight, just like constant straight. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be breathing air. It's just amazing.
That's very good to hear. We're going to put that to the test here. Now that you said it, you might end up coughing, right?
That's what the mute button's for.
Right. Mike's with us. Mike, what's going on?
Oh, not too much. Just made it back. A little bit of family drama to deal with. But hey, wouldn't be a Friday because there wasn't something
nice.
To deal with.
Do you have teenagers yet?
No, I am about a year and a half from having my first teenager.
Lord help you.
And about
and you're going
four
to have two teenagers at the same time?
Say it again?
You're going to have two teenagers at the same time?
I am. Yes.
Oh, Mike. But Justin's already survived this. I've survived this. It's going to be cool.
Yeah, but you guys each have one, correct?
Well, I had two actually at the same time, teenagers.
Okay. I'm debating whether or not I want to build myself like a soundproof box in the basement.
I think those are called bunkers.
I'm going there.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
Called a bunker. Yeah.
It gets worse before it gets better, my friend. But hang in there. Yes, I recommend the bunker.
I'm sorry, Bonnie, you were breaking up. Did you say worse? Not worse.
It gets worse before it gets better, but it does get better. Hold the line. I do recommend the barricaded. Yes, okay. Do that now.
Bunker.
Nice. Well, mine just turned 17 last weekend. And everything's amazing. So there you go.
Aww.
Yeah.
That's so great.
My daughter's 17 too.
Really?
It's a scary point of life, isn't it? Because they're on the cusp of flying the nest, and they're starting to just work out what they're going to do with the rest of their lives without you.
Yeah, one more year. It's like, decisions all on you, I guess.
Mine just turned 2. It's so hard to imagine. Like it's like mind blowing, but these last 2 years have flown. So I mean, I know it's scary.
Oh, the next 20 will fly too.
I have the most amazing paragraph that I share with all my friends who have very small children. That'll make you tear up. All about what it's going to be like when they're older and make the most of it now. So I'll send that to you afterwards.
And speaking of daughters, and speaking of we didn't intro. Well, let's finish the intro because I have a little sneak peek for you that's related to all of this.
Right. So our guest Pete, how's it going, Pete?
Hey, yeah, it's really good. It's been a while since I've been on AngularAir, so I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. It's been a long while. Yeah. So how are things going for you?
Thank you for joining at the last minute.
No problem.
We just kind of Justin came up with this and we were like, hey, let's do a thing. And I was like, hey, Pete, you want to come and do a thing? And Pete's like, okay, come on. Yeah. So here we are.
You just happened to get the perfect time for me. So I think the last time I was on, I might have even been talking about switch maps with Mike. Probably it was around about that time.
It may have been.
Yeah,
I've since forgotten what switch map does.
You can go watch the episode, right?
I may have to.
Yeah, I go back and watch it every couple of months.
Resnick. You guys were really put through the test with working with Shai Resnick. Like he takes this stuff very seriously. Like you guys were not allowed to leave the room. You were rehearsing day and night.
Pete, was that the first time I officially met you? That was so funny. Shai was I was texting him and he's like, hey, come by my room. And so I came by and it was like a bombshell had gone off in this hotel room. And in the middle of the wreckage is Pete. He's hunkered in. I think he's scribbling away like a mad scientist. And
with those glasses, you guys.
I'm hi. Oh he's like, hi. And I'm like, I'll sit over here. Okay. I just kind of watched the magic happen as they did their creative thing. But I think it was one of the first
times. We're
going to
have to find a link to that and put it in the chat so that anybody who didn't see that can know what we're talking about, because It was really funny. It was a conference talk that Pete and Mike and Shai Resnick did together. It was super, super, super fun, but it was a little stressful for Pete and Mike.
I just remember it was about half an hour before we were supposed to go on, and there was like one line I had to say near the beginning, which was something like duh, or something really small like that. And I kept like getting to the line, and I'd be like, duh, and Shai would be like, no, more like this, duh. So I'd be like, duh, and he's like, no. I mean, like, we literally spent 5 minutes just working on this like one phrase, and eventually I was just like, there's so many bigger fish to fry in this thing, like the fact that I can't remember the whole second half, right? So let's not worry about this one phrase. But
it went so far beyond just a conference talk. It was like a play. Like there were, costumes and scripts and scenes and everything, props and everything. It was great.
It's funny. Anytime you join like with Shai Resnick to do a project, you have potential for it to blow into this just living
legendary
of its own. Yeah.
And I know that we're talking about the stressful side of it, but it was a good stressful. We had a lot of fun doing that.
I mean, it's the highlight of my conference talking career by far.
Absolutely.
I did feel like you guys really bonded. You guys had a lot of meetings. Like, I felt like you guys, because it brought you closer because you guys were all so fun together.
It was a solid part-time job for a while.
Wow.
It was worth it. We appreciated it.
So, hey, Pete, do you have a year count on how long you've been doing this Angular thing?
Yeah, I was actually looking at it recently. I think I officially became part of the team in 2013 or 14. So we're talking like 7 or 8 years.
Long time.
Actually being on the team, which is, pretty scary. And there's not many people who have either been on the team as long as me or as old as me on the team. So I'm definitely the old man of the outfit at the moment.
Nice. And that was back in the AngularJS days, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I was just looking through some old material, and I came across a talk I gave in 2015 about AngularJS, and we had this cool animation that sort of showed the different contributors arriving, and they kind of fell into the middle of the screen, and it got bigger and bigger, and the ones who'd contributed the most were big icons, and then the little extras, and it just sort of crowded up. And this was just in 2015 when AngularJS was fairly new, and Angular wasn't even a thing at that point. And I'd love to redo that animation with Angular and some of the other sort of NGRX or something like that. It'd be really fascinating.
I would imagine that heat map would be like a lot of people coming in right now. There's so many.
Yeah. But for sure, Mike could be a pretty big icon in there from when he was involved earlier. So
speaking of contributors, you said you had a really cool meeting you were a part of right before this?
Yeah, so we were just talking about the features requests on the Angular repository, because I'm sure many of you know that we started a voting process a few weeks ago. And the idea is that we just got literally like 1,000 feature requests on Angular, and there's no way we're ever going to be able to do them all. And it's really hard to prioritize them. And one aspect of prioritization is knowing how many people will actually benefit from it. So the idea of the feature voting wasn't to give the community the say on whether we do it or not, but just to give us an additional signal on how we should prioritize it and whether. So we've now done that, and we've got the bot going, and every few weeks I get like 600 emails in my inbox saying that the bot has just commented on like hundreds of these issues. And we're now trying to decide how we actually then move forward and make use of that signal. So we were just having a meeting about it, and it was really interesting. We've got some situations where there are issues that have been voted highly, but even then we're not quite sure whether it's the right direction to take Angular. And then we've got other issues which didn't get many votes, but actually they're strategically probably really valuable for Angular. And so we're trying to do that little bit of tweaking, but then also actually being quite aggressive about closing stuff that we're just not going to be able to do, or the community aren't strong on. And also then how do we then prioritize the stuff that we do want to do? Because even if you look at the stuff that everyone wants and we do want to do, there's still far too much that we can do probably. So so we're looking at having like regular triage meetings in the team, like breaking it up into small sub teams who will spend a bit of time each week going through all these issues. And then if there's something that's really good, but it's a massive project, then we have this thing called NG-Elephant. And I'm not quite sure what the elephant means, but it's like, so it's probably just that it's a big thing that we just don't like, that we need to manage. And so we have this, it's basically like an internal issue tracker called NG-Elephant, and we put things that are big projects onto there, and they have to have a proposal, and it gets validated by the team, and then it goes through a prioritization process. So everything on the NG-Elephant has a priority. And then if you look at our roadmap on the website, then that is basically taking the top section of NG-Elephant and saying, these are the items that we're currently working on. And that's kind of how we've been prioritizing the big work. But then there's lots of small tasks, right? They're like small issues or small features which don't need to have a big team working on them, or like a large amount of time set aside. So we need to have a way to prioritize those as well. So we're looking at having a kind of a backlog on GitHub, and that hopefully will be transparent enough that external contributors can say, I'll pick up that one. That's something I can do. But we want to make sure that if someone does offer to work on something, that we're then able to mobilize ourselves to actually make the reviews, get it merged in a reasonable amount of time. So, because it's not fair on people if they put the effort in and then we just leave it hanging for weeks or months or years.
I'm so excited. This is so cool.
It's going to be great. It'd be really great to start sort of moving forward some of these issues that have been in the queue for a while, that are going to make a big difference to people in the community.
So do you find now that we're at Angular version 12, right? There's the whole time from the very beginning, there was probably a lot of stuff that the Angular team was planning on working on and putting into the platform and all that stuff, right? Have we kind of crested that, and now like this is the next transition where it's like, okay, we've got the main stuff we wanted. Now what do the people want, or how do we progress this forward? And it's primarily, do you see it like primarily driven by this sort of stuff now going forward, or is there still a big list of things that the Angular team has for the platform itself?
I think it's probably a bit of both. There's always been a drive to try to help with community related things, or things that the community need, and really a framework should be all about that, right? But I think what happens is that sometimes people ask for something which seems like a good idea, but it's very specific to their needs, or they're looking at the symptom rather than the cure, and so it needs to be then reevaluated and reframed in the context of maybe perhaps a bigger change to the framework, which is where things like AOT compilation originally came from, Ivy, moving to Angular 2 in the first place, right? These are all things like people were looking at AngularJS and saying, yeah, but it doesn't scale. And so we could have been sort of tweaking around the edges, but instead it was like, actually, what we really need to do to provide people with the real benefit is to make a big step, and that's a huge project. So it's about trying to balance out like massive changes to the project, which will give huge benefits but over a long period of time, versus sort of chucking in small features that will improve people's lives a little bit but potentially not actually give us the bigger picture. So I think we've always had that sort of tension in the team, and obviously Ivy has been the most recent big change, and hopefully we can start to see some of the benefits from Ivy coming through the pipeline over the next few releases.
So I think another big thing that goes along with this version 12, that's not so much of I guess it plays into the actual framework of Angular, but the move to Webpack 5, right? Like that's something with the CLI that we get now with v12.
It's amazing what the people on the CLI team, like Alan and Charles and Doug, they do. The CLI is a massively underrated project, and people just don't realize how much it does. Quite often I'll see issues where they're saying, yeah, I can't do this and I can't do that. And then you find out actually they've built their own Webpack, custom Webpack setup. And they don't realize that actually the CLI is doing like 10 times as much stuff as they realize. And it's really fine tuned, and optimizing a Webpack configuration is like a full-time job. and Charles and Alan are fantastic at that. And obviously moving to Webpack 5, it's not an area of expertise that I've got at all, but I totally understand that it's quite a big change and a big move, but with lots of potential benefits, especially around caching and improving the speed in general of builds. So hopefully with that now baked in at 12 onwards, we should be able to start seeing some of the benefits from that too. And I've noticed that there have been lots of PRs going in which have been sort of refactoring some of the insides of the CLI to make more advantage, make more use of the Webpack 5 features.
Yeah, and it not only does Webpack optimizations of using Webpack, but it's even taken some of the output, and I believe all that code's still there, of optimizing what comes out of Webpack even further for further size reductions too. Yeah,
and certainly in the future, I think some of the elements like module federation are going to become really, really important in the sort of the area, the ecosystem as a whole, and Angular should definitely be looking to try and capitalize on that.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's really exciting about, now that with v12 is that because it's on Webpack 5, we have kind of out of the box support for being able to do module federation, right? And we had Manfred on a couple shows, and he kind of covered that pre v12. So now we're in a world where it's kind of just, it's there for us, right? And that whole concept is really cool, and the ability to fragment out our deployments and things like that, thinking about how we get code out to production and how we consume it would be great.
Yeah, and for sure, there's also an interesting part of the Angular pipeline, which is this trade-off between AOT, like ahead of time compilation, and just-in-time compilation, JIT. And traditionally, people end up falling into the JIT world because they're trying to do things like lazy loading or similar ideas to module federated scenarios like plugin architectures, and it's never really quite held together in Angular. Like if you try and do AOT and JIT together, it just really, they fight each other. So you either have to just give up with AOT altogether and just go fully JIT, or you end up trying to kind of work around a few niggles. So I think one of the benefits with things like module federation and the new partial compilation format that we're releasing for in 12 for libraries is that we will actually potentially be able to support that kind of plugin architecture more natively and more cleanly with fully compiled AOT libraries and plugins and so on. So you'll be able to remove the compiler from the browser, speed things up that way, get more control. But it's definitely a work in progress and something that we've been talking about a lot. But that all comes, as you say, from being able to have the what appear to be internal updating to things like the CLI. These things, like they don't seem like big features on the surface, but actually they're providing foundations for potentially really cool things in the future.
Right, it's that update of those underlying tools that then provide us the opportunity to take these other steps, right? Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So what, I know that we've got some additional stuff with Sass support, like, is that all like a byproduct of the fact that we're also getting this enhancement of the CLI and stuff, or is that on its own? Do we know?
I don't know. Actually, I haven't been following the Sass improvements. Is it that they've moved it to a new Sass compiler?
I think there are a couple things in play, but yes, one of the things is that Node Sass isn't supported anymore. It's just the Sass module, model package, which is actually Dart Sass's implementation. So it's a lot more efficient, fewer dependencies, and what have you. But I think part of like inline Sass, and this is my speculation, this isn't anything else, that Sass seems to have won over a lot of audiences and kind of has won out over like Stylus and Less and some of the other CSS preprocessors. So I think focusing a little bit more, like adding inline Sass is a little bit easier to throw in there when it's the predominantly used preprocessor, at least from what I've seen. I think that's weighed into a little bit, but like I said, that's my speculation.
Yeah, I totally forgot about the inline Sass. That's one of those things that kind of like you just like, oh yeah, we'll just add that, And it doesn't seem like a big deal at the time, but actually it will really change the developer experience, won't it? Because then you can start moving to this more of an approach where everything stays in one file.
And that's where
I really
we're
liked
going
what you said. Sorry. I really liked what you said. You said, I don't really know about them. I'm not keeping up with that part of it. And I think this is really interesting because I think that there's such a perception out there that, you know, I talk to a lot of people that just don't ever feel like they know everything and they feel like they should. And I'm like, you know, even the people on the Angular team don't know everything. Like they all have their specialties and they're like, I mean, you guys know a lot, but not like every single thing. Like none of us know all of it. And I think it's really, and I just wanted to highlight that because you don't have to learn all of Angular to be confident with Angular. And you probably shouldn't expect that of yourself because nobody does.
Yeah, we should definitely normalize not knowing it all because.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no one on the Angular team that knows every single part of it, right? Especially the CLI, because it's a huge project really behind the scenes. And I actually set up my GitHub so that it forwards me emails for every change to every issue for both the framework and the CLI. So I get like this constant stream of emails in my inbox, which I just mostly delete. But I have it there because I find it really useful because sometimes things come through that are particularly relevant to me. So I do feel like I'm actually reasonably on top of at least those two those two repositories. But I definitely don't subscribe to the components repository because that one gets a load of updates. But even with that, I still struggle to keep on top of all the different changes that are going through.
And I'd imagine that's why Angular is referred to as a platform, right? More than just a framework, because this entire thing encompasses all these things. And Bonnie, like you said, like we don't have to consume and use all of those things or be experts in all those things, but we have the ability to get all of that if we need it, right? Which is awesome. And so the inline Sass, that's where at our component decorator for the style values, the styles array, we can start putting in Sass in that file, right? And then it'll transpile it?
Yeah, so previously, if you wanted to use Sass, you had to have a style URLs link, and then it would take you to an external file. And then basically the Webpack loader would then deal with the Sass when it was bringing that in. But obviously, if it's inline, the Webpack doesn't have a part to play. So we had to add in an aspect to the compiler, which then allows external handlers to deal with the CSS or the Sass before it then gets passed into the Angular compiler itself.
So it's actually built into the Angular compiler and not necessarily anything being done by the CLI for the Webpack configuration.
Yeah, so basically, you couldn't use it through like NGC as a command line tool, but if you're programmatically triggering the compiler, then you're able to pass it handlers for things like the styling, and we potentially will open up other potential handlers, and like the architecture's there to allow other handlers to deal with other parts of the compilation input. But at the moment, it's only for styles. And so what the CLI does is it has a Sass handler, and it then wraps that up in the particular kind of interface and passes it to its programmatic version of the Angular compiler that it runs. So it's kind of like a pluggable compiler in that sense.
It brings back memories for me as we are now into the component decorator and talking about the Sass processing and stuff, just to think about, way long ago when we were at a point where, okay, we're going to have these template URLs defined in here. And like, how does that path resolve and how do you get it, easier? And it's not this long path and things like that. And then the CLI, comes along in the build and all that stuff improves that. And now we're in this world where it feels really like straightforward to just like, I've got a component, my HTML file is just / and then the name of it. But there was this journey to get there, right? And then now the Sass inline is like revisiting that journey because it's processing that at that point. Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah, it's really interesting how we think of Angular as being like a runtime framework, but in reality, it's a lot more similar to something like Svelte, where it's being compiled up front. Like a large amount of Angular is about the compilation. Of Ivy is basically split in two. there's a runtime element, but there's a massive compile time element. And so a lot of the work that goes on in the Angular framework is actually around the tooling side of it rather than the runtime side of it. And that, in my view, is actually a good thing, because the community is the whole like design of Angular from the beginning was that it was pluggable. You could create your own modules with your own directives and your own services, so you could extend Angular. And so it was always designed that actually a lot of the meat of a product that's built with Angular is not necessarily coming straight from the framework. It's coming from this huge ecosystem of amazing products and libraries that are around there, right from NGX Bootstrap through NGRX and all these other widget libraries and other service libraries that are out there. And then, of course, you've got things like Universal and Scully and things like that. These are the sort of the extended part of Angular, which makes it a wonderful place to be in, right? Rather than just being like one small team providing you with everything.
Yeah, and that build process that you talk about is not just like Angular doing the compilation, but it's all the transpilers on top of that too, like TypeScript and Sass and all this stuff. But all those things are happening when you run the build and under the hood. And that becomes really impressive when you start thinking about, like, we keep seeing the build speeds faster and faster, right, with each release. And so you run and you serve your app, and it serves pretty quick. And then you make a change and it rebuilds and updates that serve really fast. And it's like, it's got to go through all of that stuff, right? But man, it's smoking fast. It's cool.
It's nice because you don't have to worry about being a full stack developer when writing an Angular application, and that you don't have to also be a build engineer. It's amazing that you don't have to think about that really at all. Sure, there's some configurations options like, oh, I need this asset, or hey, I'm referencing this style file. I'll just tell you about it, and then it just takes all of that, glues it all together, does all the construction, and spits it out to you. And you just need to worry about writing code for your clients and users.
Or like, I'd like my entire app to be in these 6 languages, please. That kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's like gulp, grunt. I don't even know what those are anymore. Whatever.
You keep talking about Webpack 5, and I haven't paid attention. I couldn't tell you the differences between Webpack 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know, because I don't pay attention to them, because I don't have to. Because
y'all remember when we used to put all the script tags in the index.html file? You're talking all about Webpack, and I'm like, I remember before we started with all those, and when we were first doing AngularJS, and it was like there's like 100 script tags, but sometimes you have to be careful because you have to load them in the correct order. Otherwise it wouldn't work at all.
Well, remember the progression that we were at those script tags with AngularJS, and then once Angular 2 was in like alpha and beta, the number of seed projects up. All right, well, I don't know how to do this stuff. I don't know how to take TypeScript and these templates and this code to be able to put them together to spit something else out that will actually run in the browser, because I don't have that just drop a script tag in ecosystem. So the complexity went from here to, I'm putting my hand way off camera here, way up there, and now it's even below that, because you don't have to put any script tags, because it all gets generated for you and then assembled for you.
And thankfully, there are like projects like StackBlitz, which allow you to do all this stuff in the browser, right? Because I remember I loved Plunker and things like that, because with AngularJS, any issue or like little demo, you just chuck up a Plunker, it goes. And I remember when we started really leveraging and leaning on the CLI, I was just thinking, oh, it's such a shame. I really love that environment where you could just throw something up on a web page and off it goes. And basically, with things like StackBlitz and CodePen and things, you can actually do that really effectively now. NG-Run is another one, isn't it? I think. And
StackBlitz is so beautiful. Like, they just did such a nice job. The first time we had them on the show, and we just really loved StackBlitz so much, and they came on the show. And then once they came on, then they're also like hilarious. They're so cool. The team is amazing. But the work that they do is just, it's like flawless. I know it's not completely flawless, but it's just like so nice. The interface, and it's just, I love those guys.
And they really love their moonshots, right? They're not willing to just go tweak around the edges. Like, yeah, well, we could do this. How about we just build an entire operating system in the browser? It's classic.
They're so talented.
10 times.
Hey, so is Angular old enough now where we're at a point where we're like, I remember when we used to go uphill both ways in the snow. Is that where we're at now?
That was Angularjs. Yeah.
But what about Angular?
Are
we even at an Angular point where we're talking about Angular v2 when it first came out? Like, are we there now, or like things are totally different? People coming in now, it's just you don't even know what we went through.
Do you want to talk about
when I was your age?
Right.
How about you want to talk
all
about
script tags?
With that journey? You could talk about the @view decorator. You could talk about defining your routes as part of your component metadata.
Yeah.
I think those were still like in beta before Angular version 2 was actually released, but there's some interesting iterations within there.
So then it goes in circles, right? So at the beginning of Angular 2, there was no such thing as an ng module. And it became really difficult and complicated to try and set up components so that they knew what potential directives and components and pipes were available to them. So we had this great idea of doing ng modules, which bundles them all together. But actually, ng module has its own complexity. So now we're even looking at, with Ivy, it gives us the option of effectively reverting that and making ng modules optional, which has been a big feature that lots of people have been really crying out for. And this will also help with things like speeding up build times, because you don't have to analyze quite so larger surface area of the code and so on.
I'm assuming with that you're not talking about overall build times, but more so the incremental build times, and that those chunks will end up being much smaller and that isolation is there.
Yeah, because although TypeScript is brilliant, because you can compile individual files, right? Because everything inside that file is what's needed, with a few DTS files, whatever. But with Angular, because you have a component that potentially references in its template a whole load of other directives, you need to know what the form of those directives are. So you then have to be able to parse across a whole range of other files to work out what to put into your component to make it work. And that's where ng modules come in. And then as soon as you have an ng module, then I hit that ng module and then whoosh, the whole thing, like you end up building almost everything, right? So if we can actually remove that layer, it'll mean you get back to much more sort of localized builds where I'm building this component and it's telling me I only need to look at these 4 directives, and those have all not changed, so I don't have to touch them, and I can just rebuild this single component all on its own. And so we should get some blazing improvements there if we can get that to work.
Yeah.
Being a big word.
There's an interesting question in chat of why don't we see big API changes in Angular like we saw in Vue version 3? And I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, because I think there are some big API changes, but I think that the approach that the team takes, because of the number of applications that they also need to support internally within Google, is that they're done in a way that they are not breaking changes. And if they are, there's also upgrade paths through the automation. Again, another feature within the CLI of ng update. I always get ng update and ng upgrade.
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, but to be able to apply those schematics that'll make those breaking changes for you, so that you can update relatively seamlessly across many versions of Angular. Plus, the fact that, as Justin pointed out, that Angular is rather mature at this point, and going back up, I remember when
gray hairs
uphill both ways. That it's been around for what, 7?
It's nearly a teenager, right? It's nearly a teenager.
Yeah.
So maybe it's going to go through some like teenage angst.
Oh Lord, help us! It's going to be puberty again.
Angular's going to be stomping around the house shouting. Yeah. But if you think about it, right, Angular 2 was a pretty big API change, and it completely blew everyone out of the water. Like, it was a brilliant improvement, but it also created a huge amount of turmoil for people who had to try and migrate from AngularJS. And we've had some really big internal changes recently. So like Ivy is a complete rewrite of pretty much everything inside Angular. But what we realized was that it was just not feasible given how big Angular is in terms of the number of projects that use it both inside and outside of Google. You just can't come along and say, yeah, we're just going to get rid of all of that and add this whole new thing, and without providing a migration path for everyone. So I don't know if everyone's aware, but inside Google, all the projects that use Angular are basically working off the head of the project. So there's no like multiple versions, and they don't get to choose which version of Angular they're working on. Like if you're outside of Google, you can just say, I'm going to stick with version 6 because there's this big breaking change in 7 that I didn't like. With all the projects, all like 5,000 or however many projects inside Google that use Angular, they have to be moved along. So whenever we make any change, we have to make sure that all those projects can upgrade. And it's basically on us, right? So what we do is we provide these automated migrations that help, if there is a breaking change, move them along. Or we have to literally go around the teams and help them move over. So there's been this big push at the moment to get everyone off Vue Engine and onto Ivy. So this was actually one point where we do have some applications running Ivy and some running Vue Engine, but they're all still running v12 basically. And it's really hard. And some of the people on the team are spending like 90% of their working time just dealing with this issue. And so we'd love to put lots of new APIs in, but it comes with a cost. And we have an obligation to the community as well as inside Google not to make it their lives hard. We want to keep people being able to stay at the leading edge all the time. So whenever we do bring in new APIs, we're always really conscious of like, how can we do this in a way that's going to make everything easy and straightforward for people to keep up?
Because then you have to maintain it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so if you create a new public API and it turns out it was a bad idea, that's tough luck. We're stuck with it for at least 2 major versions before we can deprecate it, right? So we have to be careful about bringing in new things as well. But also, I think, you know, we said it earlier on, a lot of the changes that have been happening in Angular don't necessarily have an impact straight away. They're like under the scenes, like so things like upgrading to Webpack 5, Ivy. These things enable things in the future, and they're huge amounts of effort, and they don't necessarily look like the Angular team is really active and busy, but actually there's a huge amount of work going on behind the scenes. And I think from lots of people, we get the feedback that they really like the stability of Angular, and that they can rely upon the fact that if they have a big project with 50 developers and hundreds of thousands of lines of code, they can pretty much keep at the top, at the latest version without like worrying all the time that everything's going to collapse or that they're going to be left behind.
Yeah, the point that you mentioned about the fact that it's got to go through all of these internal apps at Google, right, before it goes out the door is really key. I think that like I've talked to some people and I know a lot of the thought process comes around, well, they just released this version just like other products. Let's wait for a while until we see it that it's stable before we go to it, right? But I think that mentality around Angular, for me, I see it as, hey, when that's out the door, they've already internally tested it across all of these apps. So I feel pretty good that it's stable at the point that that release becomes public. So I'm good to update my apps the minute v12 comes out, the minute v13 comes out, right?
That's very good to hear. And it's true even of like what we don't perceive as breaking changes. Like the number of times there'll be some small fix for a small bug, and we try to merge it into the internal apps in Google, and there's almost guaranteed going to be someone out there that was using Angular in a way which hits that tiny weird corner case that causes it to be a breaking change. And they might have been using it in some crazy way, or they've like accessed some private API or something. So to actually get it through that is a really high bar. It's like a great filter for quality, or at least for stability for Angular.
Yeah, and that also speaks to the volume of how much Angular is used inside of Google. It's not like, oh, well, it passed all of our internal tests or applications testing, and that's only 3, but it's a large number. It's in the thousands, correct?
Oh yeah, and like before any commit gets merged into Google, main, then we run it against what we call a pre-submit, and the pre-submit submits the change against a blueprint level list of apps which we think cover a large range of the usage of Angular in Google, and we will literally run all of their tests with this new version and check to see that they all pass. But then there's another thing which I think is called TGP, and I don't know what that means, but basically that means running it against pretty much every project, and that takes like a day or more to do that. Like, so usually it gets kicked off over the weekend or something, if we know that there's a particular risky change that's going in. And so we will actually, have really good confidence that this is not going to break either internally, or how often do we get patch releases where actually we've broken someone out in the real world outside of Google? I think it's fairly rare. I very rarely see like regressions coming in from our patch releases. So it's a incredibly frustrating part of the process because it does slow down progress, but at the same time it's a huge quality win.
Yeah, it's a big win for us on the other side of it, right? It's like if you go back in the day, we talk about the concept of like dog fooding, right? And that's what we used to talk about when we talked about these frameworks, is like, oh, these companies are putting out these frameworks, but they're not dog fooding it. They're not using it internally. So it's like almost they put it out, they think it's right, and then we have to test it, right? And so it's that inverse where Google is dog fooding the platform, right? The Angular code, and we can feel great about just bumping the version.
And it also means that Angular's got a great future. It's being used so significantly inside Google that it's going to be supported by Google for a long time. So it's a safe bet.
So speaking of long-time support, I want to talk about IE11. So brace yourself, I guess. So it's deprecating support for IE11, right? My understanding is that in v12 it's deprecated, and then v13 it'll actually be gone. Does that sound correct?
That's it, yeah. Unless for some crazy reason we find that we can't remove it in v13, it's gone in 13. So that's the message we've been giving out. And we did an RFC earlier this year just to get a gauge of the community, and it was resoundingly positive about moving on. I was surprised actually how few people complained that it would disrupt them. So I think it's the right thing to do, and similar to what we were saying before about being able to create new APIs, move the project forward. Things like IE is just a complete anchor on a project because it's missing lots of features that are in almost every other browser these days. It prevents you from going to the more modern JavaScript, which gives you speed improvements and reduction in code. So it's definitely the way forward. And although already we do like differential serving, so we can actually serve different JavaScript or polyfills and so on to IE11 than the other browsers, we still have to have code inside the framework, which we can't strip out in case IE11 is needing to use it. So it's going to be great. We're going to have a big party, and like it's a bit like when you have a spring clean, you can get everyone to come around and help paint the house. So we'll be able to go through and just be like pulling bits out and chucking them down the driveway to be collected by the refuse people.
I want to take a different angle on the long-term support side of things. You're talking about celebrating IE11 support going away, but as somebody who's worked on the Angular team since 2013, 8 years now, you didn't start working on Angular. You started working on AngularJS. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts of that being sunsetted or no longer maintained by Google as of the end of the year.
So similar to IE11, it's the same kind of story, right? So you can't maintain an old piece of software forever, and so you need to give people plenty of time to move on and explain why that is the case. And I think that we've done a really good job of specifying what our goals were and when we would stop supporting it. And I think it also got a really good response from many people, because as long as you keep supporting it, then it's hard to sell to your company that you need to make the effort to migrate. But as soon as the people who build it say, actually, this is not going to be around in another year or two, then lots of senior developers and lead developers came to us and said, actually, that's great, because I can now say to my manager or the stakeholder in my project, look, we've got to invest in upgrading this, and they want to do it. It's just a case of like, how do you prioritize it within the business? So I think you can see these sort of sunsetting as a positive thing. There will always be AngularJS apps running in the wild. I'm 100% sure of it. You know, I've got a couple that I've not touched in 5 years, but they still sit there, and occasionally people touch them, like use them. But I don't intend on doing any development on them. And of course, you know, if you've got a project like that, why would you try to upgrade it to Angular? But I think in the majority, people are keen to move on, and I'm very happy that we've given people lots of time to make the step away. But also, you know, it's quite cool that there's companies that are offering to step up and then take on additional support for a longer period.
Absolutely.
And it frees up developers on the team.
Things. Can I ask you about something completely random? What's going on with Angular London, Angular Connect? I know you have the Angular London meetup, but is there I know White October's doing stuff. Like, is there, because we're, you know, what's going on, Pete?
Well, there was this thing called COVID. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah, well,
there was like a pandemic, and
but like
conferences sort of got a little bit pear-shaped.
Is there any discussion of Angular Connect?
So, so we're currently in kind of hold pattern.
Mm-hmm.
There was obviously no Angular Connect in 2020, which was sad. But I think it was definitely the right thing we pulled the plug pretty early, pretty much around the time that ngconf had to go online. And we thought, whoa, if they're doing that, things are not going to get better by the autumn, so we should definitely not do it. So we decided not to run anything last year. And then this year we were kind of thinking, oh, well, you know, it should be back to normal. But actually I'm feeling, given where we are in the world right now, we're still not in a really stable place. And even if it's safe to travel, like how many people are actually keen to travel around the world and go to conferences, even if they're allowed to, right? It's a really tricky, sell to anyone. And personally, I really like
it safe, like next year. Will you do it again?
I would definitely love to do it again. But I would only want to do it if it's in person. I think the big win for me with conferences is, and I'm sure you would agree with this, Bonnie, and actually all of you, but Bonnie in particular, is, you know, walking the halls, meeting the people, hanging out, making those personal connections, which are really hard to do online, right? And almost impossible if you're just watching a YouTube video. So for me, the really big win of Angular Connect was, and that's why we called it Angular Connect, because it was about connecting people, bringing people together and giving them opportunities to interact. And so once we're in a position where we can definitely get people in a building together without having to make sure everyone's 2 meters apart from each other, then I'd love to do it again. We've got some logistical issues. White October events are currently focusing their efforts elsewhere, because obviously as an events company, they've had to pivot quite a lot over the last 12 months or 2 years. So we need to work out how that would all work. But Josh and Ed and I are still definitely excited about Angular Connect. It's just a case of how's it going to work and when would be the appropriate time to do it. So keep an eye out. Maybe 2022. We'll see.
That would be great. I'll be there.
Nice.
In the meantime, I think I would be really, really happy to help support lots of the other European conferences as they start to come back online. It'd be really cool to see some like NGNL, and NG Vikings, NGBE, you know, all of these really cool sort of medium-sized conferences that have been really successful across Europe.
NGBE is, I believe, on for December. and confirmed as far as I don't know the details yet, but it's confirmed. I don't know about NG Vikings, but I love NG Vikings. And NGNL is being discussed. I don't know if it will probably be like you said, like maybe not this year, but next year. But I think, I'm here now, so I'm definitely leaning for that. Yes.
Angular Up is going on too, right? In November.
Oh, cool.
At least I saw their CFP and it looks like in person. I think you're wise though to hold off because I was looking at going and there's just different countries with different flight rules right now and they're constantly in flux. My sister-in-law, she just flew, I think, to South Africa, and there's different rules from like what countries you're leaving and what countries you're going into about like you have to have like a negative COVID test that's like 3 days before your flight. So then you're like planning these things in other countries. So even though things are opening up, they might be a bit, I don't know, tricky, dicey, like figuring out the logistics of it. So it's still a bit hairy.
Yeah, for sure. So, touch wood, we'll be, by the beginning of next year, we'll be in a really good place where the majority of the world is vaccinated and we're on top of the virus and it's starting to disappear. At the moment, there are huge parts of the world where it's just completely rampant and disastrous at the moment. So I think in Europe, we're pretty lucky. We've kind of seemed to be over the hill, and America's done an amazing job of getting its vaccinations in. So hopefully we can bring the rest of the world along with us too. And then Angular Connect will be back hanging out.
It'll be so weird. Like, have you guys gone to like an event? Like, even if it was just like us, like to the movies or like out, like, have you been around people yet? Cause like I went and I saw people and I was like, what do I do now? This is, I think we're going to
I went to Amsterdam and
we're
it was pretty great. It was a big adventure.
We're going to have to like ease the developers back into it.
Yeah.
As if we're not all socially awkward enough as it is.
I just carry cardboard cutouts of all y'all, and I just have it like my posse rolling around, and so I feel like at home, maybe when I leave my home. So I don't know.
Speaking of which, I just want to remind everybody, because I know we have a hard stop at the top of the hour. We have the Friday social. If you guys want to actually hang out and come socialize right after this, I'm going immediately to start the Friday social on Angular Nation. So if you want to get that kind of conference vibe and just hang out with Angular nerds, you're all welcome to join us.
We need you to like pause your time so that it's like later in the day for us at the end of the day.
I know, so I can get some wine and like.
Can we just align, like fold the earth?
Yes.
Put the same time frame for just this 1 hour.
Well, by the time you guys get off work, most of us are asleep. Especially if we start drinking now. Then
so I need like a time fold solution. Maybe Angular 14 will have that. I don't know.
I remember when we did, we went to Colorado to hang out with Jesse, and we had the whole entire AngularAir crew together. And if we do NGNL NGNL in Amsterdam, you guys have to come, and then we'll do a Friday social here live. It would be so cool to have you guys.
And Justin can bring the cutouts so we can have doppelgangers.
You totally have doppelgangers. That'd be awesome. I'd have to get fresh images, right? Yeah.
That would be the most surreal thing, like wandering through Amsterdam with all these duplicated people wandering around. Everyone would think they've eaten the wrong cookie.
They'd be like, this guy didn't do well in quarantine. I don't know. He needs to be mentally checked or something. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we're at the top of the hour. We can do picks. Is there anything remaining that we missed that like you're just like, I'm super excited about this in V12? Let's just talk about it really quick. Anything? I think we covered a lot of good stuff. All right.
I have the knowledge coalescing one that Sam's working. Sam's working on a little thing to explain knowledge coalescing, but it's not quite done yet. So that's pretty exciting. Knowledge coalescing.
The world is not ready for that. We saw a preview of that. It's amazing. So they're going to it's just going to be like, bam, for sure.
Yeah.
I totally heard knowledge coalescing. And I was thinking, what is knowledge coalescing? It's like where you coalesce your knowledge together. It's like some kind of special mind map tool or something. But then I realized what you were talking about.
I mean, it's kind of like that. That's how I felt after watching it. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, let's do picks. Any of our panelists have any picks today that they want to share?
I have quick picks. We have some really good stuff coming up on Angular Nation. Architect training starts on Monday. We have Shai Resnick coming to Angular Singapore next week, and we love Shai Resnick. We also have Hallway Track with the CLI team. Alan's coming. Pete, maybe if he has time, I don't know, might stop by. Youst are all invited. So Alan tweeted something that he was working on a couple weeks ago, and I invited him, and he was here once before, and I really liked him. So the CLI team will be back, or it's not the CLI team, it's actually the tooling team. But anyway, Hallway Track with the Angular team will be coming up. So we have some fun stuff. That and a bunch of other fun stuff coming up. This is my picks.
Nice. Nice. All right. Anyone else have any picks?
I don't.
All right. All right.
I think you should go and watch this really cool YouTube video that I saw called "I Switched a Map" or something along those lines. It was quite funny. So that's my pick.
And informative, if I remember correctly.
Educational and entertaining.
And the talent, oh my gosh, way through the roof. It was amazing. Yeah.
Well, that was Angular Connect, right?
No, that was NGConf.
That was NGConf.
Was it? Okay, and so you can find it if you just search for Shai Resnick, Mike Brocky, and Pete. You'll find it. And it's super fun.
You just have to search for Switch Map, and it'll be like number one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Probably forever.
It was both the beginning and the end of my acting career.
Nice, nice. Awesome.
I have one other item that came with the latest version of Angular. The Angular Dev Tools.
Yes.
You need a whole
we
episode.
do. Right? We need a whole episode.
So I'm just going to leave that as a breadcrumb.
Teaser.
Go check it out.
All right. We need somebody to come on and talk about that.
Get Minko on.
Yes.
Yeah. Minko. Awesome. I'll reach out to him. We'll make it happen.
Hey, Pete, it was so great to see you again. Thanks so much for last minute coming on. Really appreciate it.
It was great. And so lovely to hang out with you guys. I really enjoy it. So I need to do it more.
For sure. For sure. Anytime. All right. That's a wrap. Have a good one, everyone. See you next time. Late.
Bye.
Bye.